In this video I'll show you how to remap a spool file in Interform400. These are the topics that I will cover in this presentation. First, initial introduction to the remap window, an explanation about an option to make it easier for you to update, make sure you're not by accident changing any remaps, selecting the font for the text you're placing in the output, adjustments, rotation, line height or line distance of the output, how to ignore blank lines, and how you can remap something twice. You can even use condition on a remap window, and finally an advice about the use of the remaps. So what is this remap window? The remap window is an element that makes it possible to take some spool file data and place it in a different spot and select a different font or adjustment for that. So the remap window element is this one, and in order to use the remap window you click the element, select the spool file contents that you're going to change, like so, and click in the output where you're going to position this window of text. One thing that you might see when you start out using the graphical designer and the remap window is that if you have remapped some lines and you later regret that you want to remap, for instance, a different area, a bit more positions or fewer or more lines, then what you can do is that you can change the positions and lines here in the properties window. So if I want to, for instance, stop at line 11, I can set it to 11 here. Alternatively, I can also drag up here in the spool view, but there is an option here which is set as default when you are running the designer as the first time. So in order to tell the designer that you are deliberately trying to change a remap, then you can double click the remap, and now you can change the lines and the positions again. And when you're done, you can click on any other element, and now it's back to being protected. This protection of the remap is something that we recommend for new users, but if you feel more comfortable and you're sure you're not inadvertently changing a remap or a tabulator, then you can remove this check, and now if a remap is marked here, immediately when I click here in the spool view, it will change that remap immediately. So it makes it faster to work with, but also the risk of you making inadvertently changing a remap is also higher. So that's why it's as default set on for new users, but when you're feeling more comfortable, it might be a good idea to disable this option. When you have remapped some data, then you might want to change the font, and you do that through formatting, and here you have fonts. So it's listing all the fonts that you have defined in Interform, and you can define your own fonts as well. Here, let me for instance change the font to an Arial 10. The adjustments, you can change the adjustment of each line. So unformatted simply prints the text as found in the spool file. You can do left if you have any leading blanks, that of course they will be ignored. You can center each line, right adjust. Numeric adjustment is for numeric intention for numeric fields. So if you have a trailing minus once in a while, it makes sense to use this, and the numbers will still be aligned nicely with or without the minus. Barcode is set to tell Interform if you want to ignore or include spaces in the generated barcode. Extended is a longer story where you can actually change the line breaks. So here you can set up a maximum width, and then you can make Interform change the line breaks. So you can set up rules for how wide the line is allowed to be, and when to consider a line to be not fully used, and therefore you should respect the line breaks in the spool file. Also, when you go with extended, you can have specific commands in the spool file to say if you find a special command, and you can type in the sequence of characters that we're using to identify that command, then you can force it, for instance, to change the font or have underline and so on. So these commands are removed from the spool file, and then the remaining characters will use this change here. So for instance, if I want to have a special sequence to trigger a special character, a special font, then I could for instance say MA, then it will trigger by the marine. You cannot see these changes here in the result view, but if you do a preview, then you can see the beginning here will be the Arial, and then MA from the marine has selected the Courier font, and that's why the remaining characters of that remap is now actually Leather Gothic. It is. But that's for the extended formatting. So if we adjustment, so if you just go back for the unformatted, we're back here. Rotation. It's possible to rotate the text, and just to show you what is actually happening here, let me just show you the complete page. So with rotation 0, the reference point here is the upper left corner, but if I rotate it to 90, then this is the reference point. So the distance from the top is this distance, and the distance from the left is actually this one. So with different rotations, you can now rotate the remap text as you want. The line distance is measured in pels, so 240 pels equals 1 inch, and this is the default line distance. So we have a line distance of 1/6 of an inch. So if you want to have a 1/4 of an inch, you can do it like this, or of course also type in a smaller distance. The next option here, ignore blank lines. Well, it makes more sense if we are remapping some more lines. So let me just go back here and remap not only these lines, but include this line below. Normally the remap window will advance also for the blank lines, but if, for instance, you have an address where some of the lines are blank, you might want to move up the remaining lines upwards, and that's possible with this option. So please notice the result window down here when I activate this. So the last line of the remap is then moved up to be positioned directly after the previous non-blank line. If you want to remap something twice, you want, for instance, to present something as a barcode and then write it once more as readable text, then you need to look out for an option here on the remap, which is default on. So the blank input text is default on, which means that this spool file text that we're remapping are actually deleted from the design. So it's not possible to do another remap and remapping that twice. So I can try, but it will actually come up blank for the second remap. So if we go back to the first remap and say blank input text, if we disable that, then the first remap will leave the spool file data untouched, and so it's possible to place the same spool file text twice. In this way, it's also available for any conditioned overlays. If you are having a conditioned overlay conditioned by the same data that we're remapping here. While talking about conditioned overlays, we're also actually able to condition a remap window. So if we click this one, then you can actually set up a condition to say only the lines fitting a certain condition should be remapped. And that is a condition that we are checking line by line. And after enable it, it will check position 1 here. But with the right mouse key, I can select the position and drag around here and select the positions for the condition. And when I release the right mouse key, the positions are copied here. So now we have a condition saying position 8 should be blank, but that's not true for any of these lines, only for the blank lines. So if we say, for instance, if it's equal to a capital S, you can see now that it will advance one line down and only remap the Seaweed Street. Now if I copy this, I can actually have different conditions for these two identical remaps. So the first one, for instance, could say if it's equal to, the first one could equal to S, and the second one could be that it's not an S, and then we could actually change the font for the second one. So in this way we are actually using different remaps depending on what we find in the spool file. So you can make something bold depending on what you find in the spool file. And you can actually do that with the remaps and the condition to scan all your lines in the spool file and so on. But that takes me down to the final thing, that you should limit yourself a bit regarding extended use of these remaps, because your design can be too hard to maintain if you want some changes in the future. So for instance, move your data up and down and so on, and also the resources that Interform will use in order to place the output will be a bit larger. It will take a bit more resources to create the output if you're doing a lot of remaps with a lot of lines that you are scanning. So for these condition designs, I would prefer, or I would suggest you to use the conditional overlay with this element, which is covered in another video. Yeah. So that concludes my introduction to the remap window. For additional information, I suggest you consult the manual or your local Interform 400 support.